So these new connections, right, can only come from a place of the high interaction. So in other words, the more often we experience ourselves as waves, the stronger our electromagnetic field. We fortify, our electromagnetic field becomes stronger. It expands. And when it expands, and literally it expands like that, it expands like that, it expands like that, and it expands into another invisible dimension. Our electromagnetic field expands, and with an expansion of the electromagnetic field, all internal and external influences diminish. You see? Because that electromagnetic field is capable of neutralizing negative tendencies. That's yoga for you. There are these simultaneously accepted conflicting views within the body of knowledge in India, in Indian tradition. It's Indic in essence. That human birth, from the moment we breathe our first to the moment we breathe our last, literally, because breath is associated here with the life force in the body. Breath is an expression of life force at so many different levels, from neurophysiological in terms of the supply of oxygen into the brain activity, without which it will not last few minutes, right? To the inner mechanics of movements, how everything is integrated and held by pranas, that there are a precise number of breaths that individuals will take. This knowledge and this understanding in itself translated into the yogic attempts at prolonging human life by slowing down the process of breathing. Literally, it's as if, okay, if we are to breathe that many, let's say, however, hundreds of thousands, or whatever the number, 21,800 per day, now you can multiply average lifespan, right? Who is good at maths? That slowing down means extending life. This is not stupid. This is not naive. So all these practices were there. So in other words, what I'm pointing your attention to is to the view that life is predetermined already. Predetermined. And this is strictly in adherence to the law of karma, the prarabdha part, that what we're born with. Prarabdha, which is the largest portion of karma. And even within that, there are sort of kind of like give or take concessions versus more unapologetic stance to whether prarabdha karma can be ameliorated, let alone changed. Some of the colossal figures that considered to be iconic in Indian culture, let's bring Ramana Maharshi again into our discourse, known in his day discourses to be unapologetic about the inevitability of the prarabdha karma. But when repeatedly pushed by his close disciples and scholars who were deeply versed in all things Indian as far as the spiritual tradition, and Ramana's work in particular, challenged Ramana's view on that, wanting to hear something else from the sage. We will share with the entire group a fascinating account given by a man who has this extraordinary dharma of keeping the track of the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. His name is David Goodman. You may have come across him. He was interviewed by various panels and platforms, but he dedicated his life to the legacy of Ramana Maharshi's teaching, and at some point to the legacy of Papaji's teachings, but now mostly to the Ramana Maharshi. He served as the librarian at the Arunachala, where Ramana had his ashram. Obviously not during the life of Ramana, because he passed away long, long before that. And as a young man, there are this fascinating, I watched that interview 20 years ago. The first thing, I don't know how, when did YouTube came to life? One of the very first videos ever I've watched on YouTube. I mean, within the first 10 videos, when the YouTube was launched as a platform, was an interview of David Goodman with Papa G in Lucknow. He's still very young, now he's a senior man. And this is one of his recent videos where he speaks precisely about these leeways that Ramana let himself in terms of the inevitability of someone's karma, precisely in relation to the lifespan, not just what might or might not happen. Because it also given it is illustrated with precise examples of so-and-so, as far as a very close circle of Ramana's disciples, some of whom were potentially, accordingly, under imminent danger. And Ramana interfered in their moves, affairs, and literally physical movements, at times preventing someone to go from point A to point B because he felt they're better off sticking around and staying here. Which, of course, in itself kind of questions the otherwise unapologetic inevitability of the prarabdha karma, of how long one is meant to enjoy this embodiment. I'll leave this to you to draw your own conclusions when you will watch this video, which I find quite fascinating, purely even for the archival reasons, because it's a life of a legendary being by all standards. And then another perspective, of course, also present within Indian tradition, in parallel to that, that as long as someone enters transformation, enters the process of spiritual, let's say, work, then there and then he or she begins to influence the field of karma that one comes at birth with. And between these two irreconcilable perspectives, the whole stream of thought with regard to what we speak of now, on your suggestion, on the matter of protection. Okay? So I just wanted to bring this out in terms of the historical background and cultural perspectives on what one would want to be protected from. Can one be protected from the eventuality or from the inevitable? And what works here? How can it function? Okay? Now, if we are to adopt, let's say, the perspective that one can ameliorate, even if by postponing, this is another very, very often spoken of, you read this and that account, and often they speak like this so-and-so, the luminous being, embedded with this profound, let's say, field of Shakti, able to postpone certain events. In other words, playing with the sequential unfoldment of time. Any one of you who have read Robert Svoboda's famous trilogy, right? Agora at the left hand of God, Kundalini, and the Karma, the trilogy for which Robert Svoboda enjoyed his tremendous popularity already in India back in the days before he was even known in the West as one of the proponents of Vedic tantric teaching. You know who I'm talking about, right? Robert Svoboda. Dr. Robert Svoboda doesn't need introduction. Nearly met, invited him for dinner, and things just didn't work out. We didn't come back from British Columbia to California, where we rented house, where we invited him for a supper, and he was coming with his friend. It was a whole funny, the whole thing, how it like was arranged month in advance, and it never happened. In that trilogy, Robert Svoboda speaks about how his mentor, the legendary Aghori Swami Vimalananda, often played with this when it came to very close disciples, whom he called and referred to as his children, where he speaks about this, how he would foresee something in the field, and he was very versed, also versed in astrology as well, as many Indian gurus known to be versed in. Not all, but some are, and he was one of those. He would literally interfere in the affairs of his disciples, which otherwise he never would do, if he seen there is some potential imminent danger. Okay? So this gives us the perspective and examples that these conflicting perspectives, they overlap. They are not strictly adhered to. Even in the case of someone like Ramana Maharshi, who eventually admitted that prarabdha karma is not monolithic. It's not totally inevitable, in other words. So, why am I saying this? Because if it is inevitable, then it doesn't matter. What protection? Right? What protection? What can you protect yourself from if you meant to live that many breaths? If you meant to take that many breaths? If, however, it is an open field, then of course the question is how? And who is under the umbrella of protection? Who is not? Do we violate the potential unfoldment of events on our own, or is it all done on our behalf? This is area open to at least speculations. So let me bring something for your consideration here, and how this can potentially work. And of course, this would necessitate maybe to do a quick drawing. Remember, we spoke about pure tatwas, right? Shuddha tatwas, they're known in Sanskrit. Shuddha, pure. Shuddha, pure tatwas. This pure tatwas comprised of, right, Shiva, of course, and immediately Shiva as Shakti. So I'm putting them together here. But could be written under. Written under graphically will represent this in terms of Shiva 1, Shakti 2, and that's how they're spoken of, as first tattva, second tattva. But at the same time, you can speak of them as two tattvas represented like that. And then from Shiva Shakti, right, we have, remember, Ikcha Jnana Kriya, or will, knowledge, and action, represented by the three pure tattvas, still very pure. So that is Sada, Shiva, okay, Ishvara, and Shuddha Vidya. You don't like transliteration doing this like out of habit now with the Kundalini book. Shuddha Vidya. Okay? So, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 pure tattvas. Okay? And then comes Maya. Then 6-1 Maya. Remember? Maya, the measure. The Maya, the Maya Shakti. And then Maya is composed of what? Kanchukas, exactly. 5 kanchukas, all 5 of them here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All 5 kanchukas are here. So this, right, pure, these are known as Shuddha Ashuddha, pure, impure, and finally, the tattvas which make the manifested reality that we all partake in and share. So that is made of what? Prakriti. Because Purusha still belongs to pure, impure tattvas. And these are impure. Impure, not to be taken literally. It's a limitation of English language when translating Sanskrit term. What they are, in fact, pure tattvas. What they are in turn, let's look at this way. So pure tatwas will correspond to realm of pure spirit then, okay? So just introduce that language now, spirit. Spirit realm, psychic realm, and then physical realm. Okay? Spirit, psychic, physical. Spirit, nothing we can speak about it in terms of any of its display, because everything here is in a state of pure potentiality. Even in terms of energy, we can only speak about it in terms of its unactualized energy. It's a pure potentiality. So this is why Ikcha Jnana Kriya, the greatest secret, the greatest potency of the Kashmir Shaiva teaching. Grokking that is understanding what's happening in our own lives, because we are always in the domain of these pure tattvas from behind the scenes, but unfortunately we are constantly influenced by the world of interactions within the domain of the physical. This needs to be understood very clearly, why that is and how that completely makes us behind the bars as far as the embodiment is concerned. So what happens here? Imagine this domain of spirit. This is domain of pure potentiality. And then comes the domain of energy. Domain of energy. So this is domain of energy, psychic realm. See? And this energy now has the propensity with a downward flow, because it flows down into creation, cascading down. So in other words, in borrowing the terms in quantum physics, these are waves. So psychic realm, with all the kanchukas, including Purusha, all these are waves. Waves. And then what corresponds to, right? 5 Jnanindriyas, 5 Karmindriyas, 5 Tanmatras, and 5 Mahabhutas, right? We can write it down after. You can write it down. Just don't want to kind of delay us. And here is where these waves collapse. These waves collapse into infinite points of view known as particles. Razumeš? Verstin? Entiendo? Non entiendo? See? Claro que sé. So that's what's happening. So waves, particles. Particles, particles. This is made out of particle. I'm holding in my hand. It behaves like particles, must be particles. Yeah? Looks like duck, walks like duck, must be duck. So you see what's happening here. This is the reality of the situation. And everything here is checked by the antakarana. This is where the realm of waves and particles is in a state of constant flux. So therefore, if you think of yourself as something particular, you reinforce the materiality. You reinforce material creation. You force everything into matter repeatedly. And this is our culture, this secular culture we live in, right? It's a continuous collective reinforcement into everything. Why people don't levitate today? The simple answer given by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, behind the scenes, by people whom he worked very closely in, because the collective field is too dense. This is why none of these miracles possible today, because we live when the very large number of people on the planet are indoctrinated into this, where they only think of themselves as matter. Therefore, thereby reinforcing that. Tantric work, in a way now, just to say this, how many times I said that to you before? You may not experience, not meant to experience yourself as pure Shiva in this life, but you must live at the level of energy, at the level of waves. That is granted, you see? It is up to you to fall back into the realm of what is spoken here as psychic realm, realm of the waves, realm of pure energy. And of course, the dance is between that. The balancing act is between that what has solidity and how all that has solidity and particularity. Obviously, because that is at the level of the senses. That's where the picture of manifestation is completed. It is completed at the level of Mahabhutas, where everything is sealed in elemental order and constantly checked by the self-interacting qualities between themselves of the way karmindriyas and indriyas interact between tanmatras and Mahabhutas. You see? So all this is here, constantly checks itself. So therefore, whatever provided by the senses reinforces our belief in the materiality of the world, unless our field is open to pure waves. Okay? So, in other words, what happens at this level, and if we live at that level, there's nothing we can call protection or interference of, let's say, some kind of divine interference. Cannot. Our field needs to be opened to this, to as full and as much as possible. Because this field is malleable, this is not. The realm of physical, the realm of Ashuddha tatwas, right? Which corresponds to the physical reality of the universe, is, if you will, sealed, fixed by virtue of and out of necessity for manifestation to function, to give the unique, specific, limited point of view. That's what it is. It's a unique point of view, unique and limited point of view. So if this is represented by utmost point of infinity, that's how Shiva Shakti can also be spoken of, right? Utmost point of infinity, mathematically expressed by that, then this is where everything is finite. Absolutely everything is finite. Everything, every experience is finite. Every sensory experience is finite. No? Everything. Everything at the level of physical manifestation is finite, has beginning, has birth, decay, and death. That's it. And yet, only from the point of view of the finite reality, the infinity can contemplate itself. It has reference point. There's no reference point within infinity itself. Only from the finite point, infinity can be contemplated. So that's why you have this, and that's why you have this. See? Self-interacting dynamics. Self interacts with itself. Going back now to protection and the possibilities of how can anything be influenced, and can the laws of nature, laws of karma be bent? Highly speculative topic. And of course, it can only happen from a place where there is a direct access to the highest tatwas of reality, only. So in other words, not just access to the psychic tattvas, but access to pure tattvas. When there is an access to pure tattvas, then literally we are beneath the blueprint of creation. Why? Because we are in a field of pure potentialities. So we're tapping into the field of pure potentialities. It's like literally one dip into the ocean, into the field, into the pool of pure potentialities has the potential of complete renewal of one's psyche. Without exaggeration. Complete renewal of one's psyche. One, as it were, will pick up all that what is in the samskaric field as long as it hasn't played itself out. But there is a reservoir, renewed energy. There is a much more in terms of one's capacity. Below that level, let alone at the level of manifest reality, nothing can be changed. Nothing, absolutely zero can be changed at that level. Why? Because that's the final level. That's the level where material creation expresses itself already perfectly and run by the laws of Prakriti. It is then subject to sattva, rajas, and tamas as principal forms of energy. It is only rotated and subjected to this, what Prakriti operates with. So therefore, as you can see, it's in the tuning of the inner organ. That's what Antakarana stands here for. In the tuning of the inner organ, where a certain new alliances can be made. These certain new alliances. Many spiritual speakers, motivational, maybe not many, but some of them, like some really well-known who carved their names out, they of course receive plenty of criticism, but at the same time, they speak to some fundamental truth with regard to why nothing changes in our lives, is because the energy that we attract into our field, because we are a quantum field. Each and every human being releases energy, this electromagnetic energy. Just as there is a measurable electromagnetic energy of planet Earth that emits by the planet, each and every one of us emits electromagnetic field by the turonic structure of the heart. And this electromagnetic field is really what connects us to the unified field, what connects us to pure tatwas in this case, and give access to the pure tatwas, and what at the very same time limits us to the physical form. So therefore, according to some of these motivational speakers and on like manifesting, let's say, and so forth, is that why some people seem to be stuck in the pattern of their behavioral emotional patterns, because the correlation between the energy and the functioning of the endocrine system, which releases chemical substances into the body, right? And these chemical substances released into the body reinforces the very connections where these substances were released by virtue of synaptic connections, which are all electric, checked by the functioning of the electromagnetic field in respective cortexes. So this is what I call, many years ago, biological wheel of samsara. Not samsara in a Buddhist sense of that samsara, birth and rebirth, right? But biological wheel of samsara. Certain emotion becomes dominant, certain emotions become dominant, they influence our field, they trigger reaction, which in turn carries out electrical responses required in the synaptic cortexes to go into the existing connections we have made. That's wiring. Create electrical response there, which is required, because the peptides move like freely. And when this impulse comes in, it looks for the plugging. But it cannot plug randomly. Not even like micromillimeter. It will plug exactly to the point in the synaptic connections where it will issue a corresponding response to the body by cascading a precise mixture of that your own personally tailored for yourself smoothie, down to the minute composition of chemicals. Minute. And this compote, in turn, released now and experienced as the hormone response of that release in terms of how we feel. So if we are wired to negative emotions, and what emotions are always a byproduct of a certain feeling, of a certain, let's say, predominant rasa. That's what emotions are. There is an occurrence, there's an experience, and that experience in itself is neutral. Why is it neutral? Because it's not yet been interpreted. Every experience is neutral. We can even speculate and say, we can go further and say, that experience that we consider to be horrific, horrifying, terrifying, inhumane, is still neutral. It needs to be decoded. It needs to have our what? Exactly. It needs to have our interpretation. Well done. For following this needs our interpretation. It needs our involvement, our input. That input creates a certain emotional response. See? And if that emotional response then triggers a whole cascade of emotional responses to which we already are addicted, then you can see the picture why we can never forgo certain predispositions that we somehow, one way or another, have either fostered for ourselves or we have been heavily influenced that they become dominant in our emotive responses. So we walk around thwarted, we walk around angry, we walk around depressed, we walk around jealous, we walk around, start bending, fingers and help me with all this range of negative emotions. These negative emotions are all, one way or another, belong to past experiences. Please do your work now. Why do they belong to past and not future? Because they are not based on what yet to come in terms of how would be your response. See? So therefore, all you have is what you have already learned to experience and learned to respond. So therefore, your response already predetermined by that very propensity. So therefore, for most people, it's impossible to detach from the past experiences and have a clear projection into, let's say, how to cast their own future. I'm just giving you an outline what would be Greg Barden, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, these guys who are got their accolades and solidified their names and reputations. This is the staple. So, but it's linked to what we speak about now, that the break from this circuit is only by being able to create new neural pathways, new synaptic connections. This is why this program requires this unplugging. This is why when you all scream, roll over, and get lost, I rejoice inside. I'm a sadist, spiritual teacher who's completely gone bonkers. Each time something go haywire, bring it on. Of course, it's like tongue-in-cheek and I'm joking, but it's a serious job. Because there's no way you can disconnect and unplug in a normal day of life. No way, zero way. It can only be unplugged by hook or by crook when something happens, when there's a grace of Lord. Yes, there is also, even within the non-dual traditions of Shaivites, one of the Shakti path is when Shiva does that. It's not through any means, any catalysts, any gurus, Shiva. Yes, of course, and that will rewire everything plenty. But it may require also being like dumb walking around for a couple of years, at the very least, lost in the Gaga land. See? Do you understand now the premises of this work? Please do. I like these notes from young people, the best support and the best indication that you follow. You cannot do this by grokking it mentally. You can grok it as many times as you want. And everything continues, and the same reaction, the same response. I thought I'm enlightened, damn it. So, taking us back, so these new connections, right, can only come from a place of the high interaction. So in other words, the more often we experience ourselves as waves, the stronger our electromagnetic field. We fortify, our electromagnetic field becomes stronger. It expands. And when it expands, and literally it expands like that, it expands like that, it expands like that, and it expands into another invisible dimension. Our electromagnetic field expands, and with an expansion of the electromagnetic field, all internal and external influences diminish. You see? because that electromagnetic field is capable of neutralizing negative tendencies. That's yoga for you. In the vicinity of yoga, conflicting tendencies subside. Boom. Not Shiva Sutras, Patanjali Yoga Sutras. In the vicinity of yoga, conflicting tendencies subside. Another translation. In the vicinity of yoga, conflicting tendencies neutralize themselves. That's yoga. But we spoke about it just now from the point of view of inner mechanics, speaking about it with that, gouache scientific language. See? So, this is the value of sadhana and the value of letting go, value of forgoing this field of particles in favor of waves. See? It's not an easy thing to do, because in the ensuing phases, we have to learn to trust that, because when we feel literally scattered across, it feels very as if we are ungrounded, as if we are not stable, as if we are not, like we're losing the grip on reality, when in fact we're coming closer to reality. At that time, we are much closer to reality when something concrete, rational, here, now, tangible, and we trust, and we put all our trust in that. See? Instead of in God we trust, in shit matter we trust. That's what we put our trust and all our orientations on. So further, if this is somehow sits already, if somehow begins to make sense and get the frequency, and of course going back to this, let's say, mechanics behind changing one's setup, prevalent setup that undermines one's capacities and abilities, is that, of course, we need to be established in a place where the frequency and the velocity is so fast, is so high, that the interpretation is always delayed because of that. Perception and cognition reigns supreme. And the interpretation comes as the, what is it? Exactly. It comes as a subtext. It comes like a remark by the mind. But if it's not, the interpretation and cognition, the gap is so narrow that we almost don't have the chance. It's already interpreted. I feel shitty, and I know why, because there's plenty of reasons. And it's all like groove record. I feel good, again, interpretation, and it's all being given a full explanation. See? And in reality, what happens? Reinforcement, 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 kept down, keep down. See? So this is in the domain of what we spoke in this room when we spoke about upayas. These are self-applicable upayas. See? The operating power of the upayas, as a reminder for the newcomers, just jump on the wagon, just like catch up with us. The highest upaya of the applicable ones is empowered by Iksha Shakti, right? The Shakti of will. That's the highest of upaya. Shambhava upaya is empowered by will, Shakti of will. And that is when cognition is instantaneous. See? Instantaneous. No context, no explanation, no textbook, no how or why. Pure experience. The one down, the Shaktopaya, is when there is already the first foretelling of subject-object split. So in other words, it's already in the domain of about to get to the level of particles, to the level of particular, right? But it still remains as that. That's why it's called Shaktopaya. And that in turn, is open to the possibility of catching it and consciously joining. See? Consciously joining that what is about to be disjointed. So this is why it's so much easier and better to have higher velocity for the application of Shambhav Upaya. But as the scriptures and the masters say, when we fail, we're thrusted down. Very often, straight we fall down, we fall through to the not previous Upaya, but the very preceding Upaya, the basic Upaya, so as to reclaim it and go up, because it's very difficult to apply Shaktopaya in what we are discussing right now, because then still there needs to be fast enough mechanics for joining the beginning of the split between subject and object and locating them together. You see? If in Shambhav Upaya this happens automatically, by itself. And that's why, if you remember in the previous discourses, cognition is synthesized. Cognition is synthetic. Synthetic means made of mixture, made of both. And of course, at the baseline we have that what is known as individual means, where subject-object reigns completely and utterly, where everything is in the domain of subject and object. So therefore we need the full gamut of spiritual practices. That's where we need to have a solid platform. That's why all the yamas, niyamas, meditation, pranayamas, all the stuff, speaking in that language, but that's why sadhana per se. That's why it's called individually tailored means. We're bringing this now for you to understand this in terms of the mechanics of what rewrites, this creates rewiring. See? Because in that state of rewiring, when these synaptic connections are unplugged, right? And we are given space to create new connections. New connections, literally, because we obviously cannot live without any connections. This would not be a path suitable for householder. So new synaptic connections are welcomed to be created, to avoid falling into the same trap. You see? So again, keeping with the suggested topic of the protection and interference into the field of one's, let's say, what otherwise seems predetermined. How it happens here, it's kind of a little bit beyond the scope of just speaking about it as we did just now prior to that, because it's extremely subtle. It doesn't work at the level of, for example, Ramana Maharshi feels Ganapati Muni or whoever, Lakshmana, Swami Lakshmana, are about to have some difficult encounter, and one of them, or whatever, planned visit to relatives and have to go on a bus ride or train ride. And he sees that, senses that, and tells them, don't go, right? What happens then? Does that mean that this calamity can only happen when they are on the bus outside the ashram? Yes, for many Indian folk, this was their satisfying answer. As long as you stand next, as long as you're next to Ramana Maharshi, nothing happens to you. But that contradicts the very things that Ramana Maharshi was saying, because Brahman is omnipresent. And very often he emphasized that this connection doesn't extend to immediate physical vicinity. So that something else is at work. You see? And what happens here? Is it because Ramana Maharshi in that very moment is too lazy to go and create a clear passage for Swami Lakshman or Ganapati Muni or any other disciple with the ride on the train or the bus, so nothing happens in that journey? Why can't he do that? Why does he tell to the disciple, no, skip that trip, why don't you stay here? Not invasively, not categorically, just come on, don't have to go today, what's the rush, right? It's not happened at the level, and in the case of someone is already traveling, someone already has to be somewhere. It's not like Ramana Maharshi goes, okay, let me now change the course of circumstances and avoid something to happen. It happens purely at the level of subtlest feeling. At the level of the subtlest feeling in that turonic field, in that field which radiates, that electromagnetic field, where simply enough to have attention on someone, where it creates, as it were, that what is spoken now in terms of ameliorating any eventuality within. You see? So it's not even technical, it's not even something like in pranic healing, which is still precise, where the force of prana is either directed to a specific area of the body, or the whole being is held in the kind of field of light, bathed or showered with that golden light of prana for healing. It's not even like that. It happens at the subtlest level of where feeling itself rises. You see? So it happens at the level of the heart, and the heart only. But it can only work if that very, very turonic field already interacts between the seemingly two beings. You need to understand this. Why would it work in the first place? Because Ramana Maharshi, I'm giving this continue as an example, is not doing some kind of psychic work on someone for whom he needs to perform it. The sage never did that. But with his disciples, we know he did. He confessed. So therefore that video would be very, very interesting and educational. But it works only when there is this connection. And that connection is proverbial. You see? In the same way, we could say that very often mother's connection to the child already extended well when the children grow up, when that connection is very strong, and that connection is very strong, acts as the greatest shield from all potential eventualities when there is this unimpeded connection remains. She softens the impact of all eventualities. It is very well known, in traditions known and in cultures known. See? This is why the mother-child bond is so, so important. Because that's the greatest source of connection. But at that folk level, at the level of everything and everyone's life.